I'm going to draw you in this episode with dazzling footage, not at all up to date, of me inspecting the inside of a plastic diesel tank, but people of Alan's playlist, it'll be worth what comes by at the end. Because it's heavy, the generator needs to head inside prior to launching, and I want to fire it up first for a test, in case I've messed up the refurb. After massive effort, 3 of us managed to get the screw-in fuel filter to release. It's mucky, to understate, and so I hand-cleaned the accessible threads and surfaces and gave the tank itself a good sloshing out with fresh fuel. I have a new fuel filter, and that's very straightforward to fit, along with a new rubber seal. So that happened, and I hope I talked it to the correct middle ground. A reliable seal, but not so tight that it nearly ends the life of 3 upstanding citizens next time we need to swap out the filter. I fitted the brace and bracket back on the tank, having primed and painted all the parts that weren't stainless, and I also had a brainstorm about ways to redesign the mounting so next time it doesn't require 17 dozen steps to achieve a simple maintenance task. But it appears the sadists at Petter and Stephill won this round. And to the plumbing. Of course I've got loads of 8 and 10mm hose, but apparently, just to be obtuse, the injector hose has to be 7mm, so I've got some of that. I'm swapping out all the soft hoses. The solid copper fuel lines seemed fine, so I just cleaned them up and left them well alone. The original build had a combination of little spring clips, all of which rusted, and hex brass compression clamps, which were permanent and needed to be ground off. So I'm defaulting to reliable single-ear compression O-rings, of which I now have many, many. This trio connector was originally a flimsy plastic, so naturally we've upgraded. You'd expect nothing less. The hose is reinforced, not the very thin wool variety I've seen rip and perish alarmingly quickly, so it's rather stiff. I did eventually manage to get all the various bits connected though, with minimal spaghetti junctioning. I brushed and cleaned up all the original bolts, as in their style I'm now accustomed to, practically all were a different size, with different thread pitches, and even a mix of imperial and metric. I swiftly bolted on a new grounding wire. The genset's body is connected to the electrics box contents grounding connections on the switches. This wire here originally headed to the steel trolley, and that was it. I've seen vicious arguments online about what people in fiberglass boats are supposed to do when it comes to grounding gensets, and I'm still trying to work it out. Let's do the oil replacement. It's already drained, so I removed the inlet cap, and it's a sort of sampling sucky thing, with no obvious high or low mark. So I bought a comically expensive genuine Petter dipstick, and it turns out that the step on the sucky thing is in fact the high and low range. I checked the user manual, and it says that these engines are happy with synthetic oil, so I've gone for a safe choice of part synthetic 15W40. I'm not planning on starting it in the extreme cold, but I'm thankful that I waited for the dipstick and didn't just pour in the quantity of oil the manual suggested, as I would have overflowed horrifically. And a refuel, with diesel, naturally, because we need to see if the genset fires up. My only real intrusion has been the hose changes and the electrical rewiring, otherwise just an oil and filter change, but still it would be typical on a deadline to have a functioning generator end up not functioning after the overhaul. There was a brief puff of smoke, but it cleared a couple of seconds later. Total, utter success. Well, so far only at the noisy end. I needed to see what was up with the more useful end. I nervously plugged in a hammer drill. It span up. Good. But now for more of a test. A 2 kilowatt heater. Yes, heat. I have not Alan, help! The whole thing up after all. The generator needs a home inside the boat, and I've earmarked a location at the bow, beneath the bow hatch. I want to build a structure around this which doubles as both a step for those using the hatch and a defender for the generator when it comes to knocks, splashes and bumps. This process was messy, but the foam came out and the custom cut steel brackets and rubber mounts went in. I had to release the generator from the landed clutches of its earthly trolley, but this involved a mere trio of old bolts. There are a number of things I can do, but one of the things I can't do is lift a 70-kilo generator up a stepladder, through a hatch, and onto the mount. Luckily, the Dauntless Yard team are heroes, and they also have a very smart lifting machine. No casualties resulted, whether human, boat, or generator. Here it is then, set as low as possible given the shape of the bow inside that cutaway, and with space for the anchor chain and rope to still live down below there. There's also enough space for the crank handle to fit in on the left-hand side. Imagine putting all of this together, only to forget about the crank handle. This was the last big lift that demanded completion before, well, lifting Alan himself. This needed to be done in a number of stages, and that's where the rather long-winded and actually rather frustrating last fortnight has developed. First off though, the only reliable constant were the yard team. They started early to fit us in, were flexible about timings, and went far beyond duty. But into the crucible of complication are tide times, as the creek is dry much of the time, the need to prime and paint the spots where Alan's cradle touches the hull, my paid work schedule back in London, and then the availability of other human collaborators. Alan marched onward though toward the slipway, or rather, hung aloft in a rather undignified manner, where he'd hold station for a couple of days so I could paint, and complete other tasks like the bowsprit upgrade. This weekend break, when the yard goes somewhat quiet, gave me the chance to fuel Alan up, as it was easier to get the bulk fuel over from the storage tanks to where Alan now slung. I'm not installing an external fuel filler cap, as it would be totally impractical for the number of times it's used. Instead, I have a new, more powerful inline pump, a straining filter, and lots of 20mm hose. The heaviest containers I could lift and move around solo were 30 litres, so I managed to get nearly 14 of these pump cycles into the expandable fuel bladder strapped into the belly of Alan. I did hope to get it to near full capacity, but it became alarmingly clear that the actual dimensions when full don't match those claimed in the paperwork, so I had to abort the pumping mission a little bit short. This took me most of the way into the early evening, and I pondered the route that a couple of days later we'd use for the launch, and then mooring alongside to await departure. There's lots of jetty space and other moorings along the creek, but I managed to secure a spot on the very much in-demand pontoon. We've had well over a week of intense sun and heat recently, which I do not enjoy, but this particular evening, for a few hours at least, a splodge of cloud did pass over. I felt my capacity for work double with every degree the temperature dropped. It's going to be strange heading down the creek to the sea for the very last time. Previous trips have only been for a few days or a week, but Alan, who over the last 3 years became a rather attention-seeking part of the fabric of the boatyard, is destined to move north. And he must, otherwise we'll get to episode 746 of me tinkering around with the boat, still ashore. Morning came, and I decided to do one of those walk-around tours with an action camera that YouTube people normally do when they haven't fully decided what to say, but then crack on regardless. Well, you're joining me, and you're joining Alan, and you're joining the high water, and we're about to go on that water. I've made a few changes on the outside that you'll see. We've got some new reflective strips because the old ones obviously back in the day were a bit manky, so people can see us if they shine lights at us. We've got some polypropylene ropes and springs now, which don't sink and they don't take on too much water. And I think probably the most useful upgrade is that that wobbly anchor mount is no longer wobbly because I've added, you can probably see around here, a large angle of stainless steel, and that will keep the whole thing nice and secure. We also have a new boat hook here. It's one of the rolly-uppy ones, which I'll show you in a lot more detail later on. But apart from that, I should probably get ready because the yard staff are about to arrive. The lift-in really was down to the skill of the guys who launch and recover boats multiple times most days, often with arduous manoeuvres in tight spaces. All I really needed to do was stand up top, be ready to fire up the engine whilst afloat but with the sling still in place, and then tootle up and down the creek whilst the team cleared my spot on the pontoon and got ready to grab mooring lines. Soloing Alan at times is something that, I'll be honest, does worry me, especially around other people's boats. I did forget to film the crucial moment of mooring. Right, well, the yard staff are now retreating, and I could have done that better. I had to have 2 goes, but anyway, we've managed to moor. And this is where you would now find Alan. I'm still working through a list of nice-to-haves rather than must-haves from the to-do list, and when I'm not called away for work, have done so all day, every day. There's so much remedial or repetitive work that continually needs doing, but doesn't merit inclusion in a YouTube episode. The stable weather continues, and the wind is moving from being an easterly back to the prevailing, so aside from the odd thundery shower, we're looking good to complete leg 1 this week. I'm hoping to have a companion or 2 for most of the legs, but I do need to ready myself for the seriously increased inherent difficulty when single-handing a boat without the sort of deck common on yachts or normal motor cruisers. A joyous note to finish on though. Alan's inflatable launch has been confirmed to contain, and indeed retain, air when asked to do so, and otherwise I've only needed to pay attention to the grand renaming ceremony. I've yet to work out how to blank out the old names, as the tube is Hypalon, which most paints and coatings dislike. Yes, folks, it could not have been any other name, could it? And I know that this doesn't strictly comply with the correct Nordic convention, but Allenson does not comply. On the move soon. Bye.